It wasn't supposed to unfold this way. When Lauren first mentioned the party, I barely gave it a second thought. After all, I knew her habits well enough by now. An evening out with Megan and her usual group, a few drinks, maybe some dancing, but nothing too outrageous. At least, that's what I had always believed. Yet, something about this particular night felt off. Perhaps it was the casual way she had slipped it into conversation, or the fact that Megan had a reputation for hosting the kind of gatherings where anything could happen. I tried to push my unease aside, but the feeling lingered. I knew Lauren too well to ignore the subtle changes, the way she had seemed preoccupied lately, her increased late nights without much of an explanation. We had argued about it before, but this time was different. It wasn't just jealousy or frustration gnawing at me. It felt like something significant was slipping away. The night before the party, I decided to speak up. "I don't think you should go," I told her, keeping my tone even. "It's not that I don't trust you, Lauren, but lately, I don't know. It feels like we're not on the same page anymore." Her response caught me off guard. "You're being paranoid again," she snapped, narrowing her eyes. "It's just a party. Megan's hosting it, not some stranger. Why do you always do this?" That word, always, hit me harder than I expected. She made it seem as though I was constantly monitoring her, suffocating her with doubt. But that wasn't true. I had always given her space, trusted in the strength of our relationship, believing it was solid enough to withstand any outside temptations. But lately, she had grown distant, both emotionally and physically. We lived under the same roof, yet I could feel her slipping away. "I'm not trying to control you," I said, struggling to keep my composure. "I just need to be honest about how I feel. Something about this party doesn't sit right with me. Can we at least talk about it?" She rolled her eyes, brushing me off as if my concerns were nothing more than irrational insecurities. "Talk about what? You're acting like the moment I walk through that door, I'm going to do something terrible. It's just a night out. Why do you always assume the worst?" But it wasn't just about one night. It was everything that had built up over the last few months. The distance, the vague excuses, the way she no longer seemed present when we were together. I felt like I was losing her piece by piece, and this party seemed like a breaking point. Yet, instead of pushing the argument further, I let it go. I don't know why. Maybe I was just exhausted from always being the one trying to pull us back together while she seemed more willing to drift apart. So when she walked out the door that evening, I didn't stop her. But I couldn't shake the unease. As the hours passed, I found myself pacing around the house, my mind racing with thoughts I didn't want to entertain. The silence was overwhelming. Midnight came and went, and still, I hadn't heard a single word from her. No call, no text, just the emptiness of the house pressing down on me. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. I reached for my phone and opened the tracking app we had installed months ago when she kept misplacing her device. It felt wrong, invasive even, but in that moment, I didn't care. I needed to know where she was, what she was doing. I had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The app loaded, and her location appeared on the screen. I expected to see her at Megan's place, maybe at a nearby bar. But what I saw made my stomach tighten. A motel. I stared at the blinking dot on the screen, trying to make sense of it. A motel? Why would she be there? My pulse quickened, anger and dread twisting inside me. This wasn't just a party. Something else was happening, something I had refused to admit to myself. Without hesitation, I grabbed my keys and rushed to the car. The drive to the motel felt agonizingly long, though it probably took no more than 20 minutes. My hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears, my heart hammering harder with each passing mile. I kept glancing at my phone, watching the dot that marked Lauren's location. Still there. Still unmoving. I wanted to turn back. I wanted to convince myself that I was overreacting, that there was some completely reasonable explanation for why she was at a place like that. But deep down, I already knew the truth. The growing distance between us hadn't been my imagination. It wasn't just stress or a rough patch. It was something else, something I had been too afraid to acknowledge. When I finally pulled into the parking lot, I parked a short distance from the building, not wanting to draw attention to myself. Only a few cars were scattered around, none of them familiar. I sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel, staring at the neon sign flickering above the entrance. Westmore Motel. The place looked exactly like I had imagined, worn down, discreet, the kind of establishment where people went when they didn't want to be seen. Cheap, hidden, a perfect place for keeping secrets. I reopened the app, my thumb hovering over the screen, as if expecting a different outcome. But nothing had changed. The small dot remained in place, unmoved. She was still there, inside one of those rooms. Though the exact number wasn't displayed, it wouldn't take much effort to figure it out. Only a handful of possibilities existed. Stepping out of the car, I crossed the parking lot, my breath unsteady, my thoughts a storm of possibilities I didn't want to consider. The cool night air did little to soothe my nerves. My mind ran through every worst-case scenario, painting vivid images I wished I could erase. Lauren, inside, with someone else. Laughing, smiling, sharing moments she hadn't shared with me in months. As I passed each door, I took in the worn numbers marking them. 201, 202, 203. Nearing the end of the row, my steps slowed, my pulse hammering in my chest. Then I saw it, her car. Parked at the far end, deliberately tucked away, as if she didn't want anyone to notice. That was all the confirmation I needed. I stood there, staring at her car, as the truth settled over me like a crushing weight. There were no more excuses, no room for denial. She was here, in a motel, and there was no justifiable reason for it. The foundation of trust we had built had crumbled, replaced with something I wasn't ready to name. With clenched fists, I made my way to the door nearest to her car. Room 214. The blinds were drawn, but a dim glow from a lamp seeped through the edges. I hesitated, my breathing shallow. Did I truly want to see what was on the other side? Did I want to face the truth? Yes, I had to. I raised my hand to knock, but stopped just inches away. Instead, I pressed my ear to the door, straining to listen. At first, there was nothing but silence. Then, faint voices, hers. A quiet laugh. Another voice followed, deeper, masculine, muffled but unmistakable. A sharp surge of anger shot through me. That was enough. Without a second thought, I pounded on the door, my knocks loud and forceful. The voices inside fell silent. A shuffle of movement followed, hurried whispers, a sense of panic. My whole body tensed with adrenaline. I knocked again, harder this time. Lauren, open the door. My voice was raw with anger, my emotions barely in check. For a few seconds, there was nothing but quiet. Then, slowly, the door creaked open just a sliver, revealing her face. She looked stunned, pale, wide-eyed, like she never expected to see me standing there. Her hair was tousled, her makeup smudged, evidence of whatever she had been caught in the middle of. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, voice low, eyes darting around the lot, checking if anyone was watching. I didn't care who saw. "What am I doing here?" I shot back, forcing the door open just enough to take in the scene. The bed, the wrinkled sheets, the man sitting at its edge, some stranger, exactly as I had feared. Lauren moved quickly, stepping outside and shutting the door behind her, blocking my view. "This isn't what it looks like," she said, her voice uneven, but her eyes told the truth. She was scrambling, desperate to regain control. A bitter laugh escaped me. "Isn't it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what it is." I couldn't believe it. After everything, after every chance I had given her, this was where we ended up. She reached out, fingers grasping for my arm. "Let me explain," she pleaded, her voice shaking. I pulled away. "Explain? Explain what, Lauren? That you're here, in a motel, with him?" My voice was cold, each word weighted with the reality of her betrayal. She opened her mouth, but no words came. For the first time, she had nothing to say. No excuses, no justifications. And that was when I knew it was over. Whatever we had, whatever I had been holding on to, was gone. Her hand dropped to her side, the shock on her face shifting into something else. Something guarded, calculated, like she was already figuring out her next move. Inside, the man hadn't moved, still sitting there, silent, avoiding my gaze, too afraid to face what he had helped destroy. "This isn't how it looks," Lauren tried again, her voice steadier now, her composure slipping back into place. But it was too late. I had already seen enough. "Just let me explain, okay? Can we go somewhere and talk?" she pressed. I shook my head, the mix of disbelief and anger boiling over. "Talk? What's left to talk about, Lauren? I've spent weeks worrying, trying to fix things, thinking we were going through something together. And here you are, proving me right." She glanced toward the door, a flicker of hesitation in her eyes before looking back at me. She was scrambling, I could see it, searching for a way to spin this into something less than what it was. "It's not what you think, it's just..." Things between us hadn't felt right for a long time, and I had no idea how to handle it. That's why I came here, to clear my mind, to make sense of everything. Clear your head? Is that what you're calling this? I cut in, my voice rising with disbelief. I don't need your excuses, Lauren. You're caught. Don't insult me by pretending this is anything other than what it is. She took a hesitant step forward, her expression shifting, softening as if she still believed she could salvage the situation, twist it to her advantage. I'm sorry, okay? I messed up. I know I did, but let's go somewhere and talk. We can figure this out. The phrase echoed in my mind, empty and meaningless. Figure it out? How could there be anything left to work through when the person I trusted had been deceiving me for months? I took a step back, widening the distance between us. No, Lauren, you still don't get it. I'm done. There's nothing to figure out. The moment you walked into that room, you made your choice. You didn't care about us then, and you don't care now. She parted her lips, maybe to argue, maybe to beg, but I didn't give her the chance. My voice dropped, not from anger, but from exhaustion. Was it worth it? The question came out quietly, heavy with the weight of everything that had led to this moment. I was drained, worn out from months of carrying our failing relationship alone. Was it worth throwing everything away? She stood there, silent for a moment, her eyes flickering downward. A crack appeared in her carefully controlled expression, just enough for me to see what was underneath, not remorse for me, but regret for herself. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done, only for getting caught. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. I never thought it would go this far. I stared at her, stunned. Go this far? Lauren, you've been lying to me for months. You disappeared, made excuses, and I sat at home blaming myself, thinking I was the problem. And now, after everything, you're telling me you didn't mean for it to go this far? That's all you have to say. Her eyes lifted, pleading. Please, I don't want this to be the end. We can fix this. I'll end it with him, I swear. I'll make things right. A laugh escaped me, not out of humor, but out of sheer disbelief. It was the sound of someone who had finally reached the end, someone who had spent too long holding on to something that no longer existed. End it with him? I shook my head, the reality sinking in. It's already over, Lauren. The second you decided to lie, the second you chose someone else over us, it was done. You don't get to make it right now. That's when the tears started. Maybe they were real, maybe they weren't. I couldn't tell anymore. She wiped at her face, trying to appear remorseful, but it didn't matter. The damage was done, and no amount of tears would undo it. You need to leave, I said, my voice steady but drained. Go back inside, do whatever you want, but don't come home. We're done. Panic flashed across her face. She shook her head desperately. Please don't say that. Don't just throw us away like this. Throw us away? I repeated, feeling the last flicker of anger rise before burning out completely. You already did that. I'm just finishing what you started. I turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last, but also more certain. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see the regret in her expression, didn't want to hear more lies or half-hearted apologies. As I slid into my car, the full weight of everything crashed over me. It was over. Years of love, trust, and commitment, gone in a single night. And yet, as I pulled away from that motel, a strange feeling settled over me. Relief. For months, I had been holding on to something broken, pretending it could be repaired. But now, at least, the truth was out. And the fight? The fight was finally over. I drove through the city, the lights blurring past as my grip tightened on the steering wheel. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was fading, leaving only a dull emptiness behind. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I just felt nothing. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. Not with a weak apology outside a cheap motel. Not with Lauren begging for something we both knew was long gone. I had spent years believing that no matter what, we could work through anything. That love was enough. But tonight, standing in that parking lot, watching her lies unravel one by one, I finally saw the truth. The woman I had married was gone. Maybe she had been for a long time. I pulled into the driveway, but the sight of our house brought no comfort. It looked the same, but it no longer felt like home. Now, it was just a building, a place where two people had drifted too far apart to ever find their way back. I sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the front door, knowing that once I stepped inside, everything would change. But for now, I just wasn't ready to face it. Nothing could drown out the memories. Not the silence, not the empty house. So I sat there, lost in thought, replaying the past few months in my mind, searching for the warning signs I had missed. The late nights with no explanations. The way she would come home and act as if nothing had changed, even though I could feel the growing distance between us. The times I tried to reach out, to talk to her, only to be met with indifference, as if my concerns were nothing more than paranoia. How long had this been happening? How long had she been hiding it? A wave of bitterness welled up inside me, but I swallowed it down. Anger wouldn't change anything now. The truth was, I had lost her long before tonight. I had just been too blind, too stubborn, to accept it. Forcing myself to move, I stepped out of the car and walked inside. The house was dark, quiet, just as she had left it earlier that night. Tossing my keys onto the counter, I stood in the kitchen, the weight of everything bearing down on me. My eyes flicked to the clock, 2 in the morning. She'd be back soon, or at least I assumed she would. The argument outside the motel had been brutal, raw, but I knew Lauren well enough to know she wouldn't just vanish. She would come home, try to explain, try to convince me that this wasn't what it seemed, that we could still fix things. But I was done. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sank onto the couch, staring at the wall as I took a long sip. The bitterness of it didn't matter. I needed something, anything, to cut through the hollowness settling inside me. My mind drifted back to the night we first moved into this house. We had been married for 2 years, still caught in that golden phase where everything felt effortless. I could still see the excitement in Lauren's eyes as we unpacked boxes together, laughing, making plans for the future. We had dreams, big ones. A family, vacations, a life built on love and trust. That felt like a lifetime ago. Now, all I could think about was the expression on her face when she had opened the motel door. The panic, the guilt, but most of all, the lies. Even caught in the act, she had tried to twist the truth, to make it seem like there was still something left to salvage. As if we could sweep this all under the rug and continue pretending. But there was no going back. Not this time. The front door creaked open, and I heard her hesitant footsteps in the hallway. She paused, probably uncertain if I was still here. I didn't move. I didn't acknowledge her presence. I just waited, my fingers tightening around the cold bottle in my hand. She finally stepped into the living room. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale. She looked different now, like the weight of her actions was finally crashing down on her. But it didn't matter. The damage had already been done. She sank into the chair across from me, keeping her distance. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence between us stretching impossibly wide. "Can we talk?" she finally asked, her voice unsteady. I didn't respond right away. I took another sip of my beer, letting the quiet settle like a wall between us. Finally, I spoke, my voice cold and distant. "What is there to talk about? You've said enough." She lowered her gaze, wiping at her eyes. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I swear, it wasn't what it looked like." A bitter laugh escaped me. "It wasn't what it looked like? Lauren, I found you in a motel room with another man. How much worse could it be?" "It was a mistake," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I wasn't thinking straight. I was scared. I didn't know how to fix things between us, and I made a horrible choice. But it's not what you think." For the first time, I turned to look at her, my gaze hard and unyielding. "You cheated, Lauren. You lied. And even now, you're still lying. Just admit it. Stop pretending this is something it's not." She flinched at my words, fresh tears brimming in her eyes. "I'm not lying. I know it looks bad, but it was only one time. It didn't mean anything. I was lost, and I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to deal with everything." I studied her for a long moment, but the anger I felt wasn't the fiery, explosive kind. It was something colder, something final. The kind of anger that made you realize you were done. "It's over, Lauren," I said quietly, setting my beer down. "There's no fixing this. You made your choice. Now live with it." She shook her head, desperation creeping into her voice. "Please don't say that. I love you. I don't want to lose you." I stood, my decision already made. "You already did." As I walked away, her quiet sobs followed me, but I didn't stop. The truth was out. There was nothing left to say. I made my way down the hallway, stepping into the bedroom and shutting the door behind me. Lauren's cries echoed faintly from the living room, but I tuned them out. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I felt the weight of everything pressed down on me. It was a strange, heavy feeling. The feeling that settled over me wasn't the explosive rage or gut-wrenching sorrow I had anticipated. Instead, it was an empty, quiet certainty. This was the end. The air in the room felt colder, unfamiliar, as though it no longer belonged to me. My gaze swept across the space I had once called home, the walls lined with photographs, the small tokens of a shared life. Images of our vacations, the joy of our wedding day, and souvenirs from moments that once felt flawless. But now, they seemed distant, as if they belonged to someone else entirely. My eyes lingered on a photo from our honeymoon, taken on a serene beach in some far-off place where laughter had once come so easily, where we had believed nothing could ever touch us. How had everything unraveled so quickly? Or maybe it hadn't. Maybe the cracks had been forming for a long time, slowly widening while I chose not to see them. Perhaps Lauren's betrayal wasn't the cause of our downfall, but simply the final piece in a structure that had been collapsing for years. A gentle knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I didn't respond, yet Lauren entered anyway. Her face was streaked with tears, her expression raw with desperation. She stood in the doorway, hesitating, as if even she understood that there was nothing left to salvage. "Can we talk?" "Please," she whispered, her voice fragile. For a moment, I simply looked at her, the woman I had once adored, the one I had built a life with. And yet, standing before me now, she felt like a stranger. Someone who had made choices I could never comprehend. Someone who had shattered everything we had for a fleeting moment of selfishness. "What is there to talk about, Lauren?" My voice was devoid of emotion. "Do you really think words can undo this? That we can somehow rewind and pretend none of this happened? We're past that. Far past it." She stepped further into the room, arms wrapped tightly around herself as if bracing against a storm. "I know I ruined things," she admitted, her voice unsteady. "But I don't want to lose you. I'll do anything to fix this. I'll end it with him. I swear, I cut her off, sharper than I had intended. "There's nothing left to end, Lauren. I don't care about him. I don't care about whatever reasons you have. The second you stepped into that motel room, you made your choice. And that choice ended us." Her face crumpled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I love you. I know I made a terrible mistake, but I still love you. We can fix this. I know we can." I shook my head slowly, the sadness in my chest now laced with something colder. "You love me," I repeated, my tone quieter now. "Are you sure about that? Because this doesn't feel like love. It feels like regret. And regret won't fix what's broken." She collapsed onto the bed, burying her face in her hands, sobbing. But I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. The trust we had, the foundation of everything we'd built, was gone. Irrevocably shattered. I stood up, the decision already solidified in my mind. "I'm leaving, Lauren," I said, my voice steady. "I can't stay here and pretend this is something we can fix. We're done." Her head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. "What do you mean you're leaving? Where will you go?" I didn't have an answer. I hadn't thought that far ahead. All I knew was that I couldn't remain in this house, in this life built on falsehoods. I needed to be anywhere but here. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I'll figure it out. I just know I can't stay." She stood, reaching for me, her voice thick with desperation. "Please don't go. Don't just walk away like this. We can get help, go to therapy, whatever it takes." I stepped back, out of her reach, shaking my head. "No, Lauren. Therapy won't fix this. You crossed a line, and there's no coming back from that. You made a choice, and now I'm making mine." The silence that followed was suffocating. For a fleeting moment, I almost wished I could rewind time, go back to the days when we were happy, when everything was simple. But those days were gone. Holding on to the past would only prolong the inevitable. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet, throwing in only the essentials, clothes, my laptop, a few things I'd need for the next few days. With each item I packed, Lauren's expression grew more anguished, as though every piece of clothing was another fragment of our life together slipping through her fingers. When I zipped up the bag and slung it over my shoulder, she stepped in front of the door, blocking my exit. "You can't just leave," she said, her voice trembling. "I love you. Please don't throw us away like this." I met her eyes, feeling the weight of her words, but knowing, deep down, that they came too late. "I'm not throwing anything away, Lauren," I said. "You did that. I'm just walking away from the wreckage." I stepped around her and walked out of the bedroom. The house, once warm and full of life, now felt cold and empty. But I didn't look back. I didn't let myself hesitate. The front door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, a strange sense of freedom washed over me. It wasn't the overwhelming relief I had hoped for, but rather a quiet emptiness, a silence that lingers in the aftermath of a storm. The destruction was still there, the damage done, but at least the storm itself had passed. I slipped into my car, gripping the steering wheel as I stared at the deserted street ahead. I had no plan, No clear direction, only the certainty that I couldn't stay in that house another second. The life I had built with Lauren was gone, and now I had to figure out what came next. How to rebuild something from the wreckage, something that no longer included her. I drove aimlessly through the empty streets, the late hour lending an eerie stillness to the world outside. My mind was racing and yet, at the same time, completely numb. I replayed every word we had exchanged, every desperate plea she had made, but none of it changed the truth of what had happened. She had shattered something between us, something vital, and no amount of apologies or tears could put it back together. After about 20 minutes, I pulled into the parking lot of a cheap motel, the irony not lost on me considering how this night had begun. But I wasn't in the mood for reflection. I just needed somewhere to exist for a little while, away from the suffocating weight of that house. The motel was as run down as I expected, flickering fluorescent lights in the hallway, thin walls, and the stale scent of old cigarette smoke lingering in the air. But none of that mattered. I paid in cash, checked in, and made my way down the dimly lit corridor, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. The room was just as dismal as I had imagined: cheap, lifeless furniture, a bed that had long since lost any semblance of comfort, and a flickering TV I had no intention of turning on. But this wasn't supposed to feel like home. It was just a temporary shelter, a place to retreat from the chaos for one night. I tossed my duffel bag onto the bed and sank down beside it, running a hand through my hair in a futile attempt to quiet the storm inside my head. It hit me then. This was the first time in years that I was truly alone. No Lauren. No pretending that everything was fine. Just me, sitting in a dingy motel room, trying to process how my life had unraveled in a matter of hours. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen, unsure who to call. Jason, my best friend, would likely be asleep, and I wasn't ready to explain everything yet. My finger hovered over his name before I locked the screen and set the phone aside. The truth was, I wasn't ready to talk about it. Not yet. Instead, I leaned back against the bed, staring up at the stained ceiling, letting the silence close in around me. My thoughts drifted back to the argument in our bedroom, the way Lauren had begged me to stay, to forgive her, to believe that we could fix things. But what she didn't understand was that some things couldn't be repaired. Betrayal wasn't something you could just cover up with apologies and expect to heal. Trust, once shattered, couldn't simply be pieced back together. I had given her everything: years of my life, my loyalty, my love, and she had thrown it away for someone else. It wasn't just the act itself, it was the deception, the slow decay of our marriage as she pretended nothing was wrong. I turned onto my side, the motel bed creaking beneath me, and closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept looping back to the moment I had seen her at the motel, the look of panic in her eyes when she realized she was caught. It played over and over, an endless, torturous reel I couldn't turn off. Frustrated, I grabbed my phone again, scrolling through old photos, snapshots from a time when things had been good, or at least when I had believed they were. There was one from a hike we had taken, arms wrapped around each other, smiling at the camera like we had the world figured out. It was hard to reconcile that image with the reality of tonight, the way we had torn each other apart just hours ago. At some point, exhaustion must have claimed me because the next thing I knew, morning light was filtering weakly through the thin motel curtains. I woke up groggy, the stiffness in my neck a harsh reminder that this was no place for comfort. For a moment, disoriented, I just lay there, waiting for my mind to catch up. And then it all came flooding back. The weight in my chest returned, dull but ever-present. But something was different now, less immediate, more distant, like a wound that had started the slow process of scarring over. I sat up, rubbing my eyes before glancing at my phone. A part of me expected to see a string of missed calls and messages from Lauren. But the screen was blank. A quiet relief settled in, though a sliver of doubt lingered. Had she already given up trying to reach me? Or was she waiting for me to be the one to come crawling back? But I wasn't going back. I knew I had to talk to someone. I couldn't keep all of this bottled up inside. Jason. He had been through his own struggles, and he was one of the few people I trusted enough to share this with. Grabbing my phone, I scrolled through my contacts until I found his name. My finger hovered over the call button for a brief moment before I finally pressed it. He answered after a couple of rings, his voice groggy but immediately laced with concern. "Hey, man. Everything all right?" I swallowed hard, struggling to find the right words. "No," I admitted, my voice cracking slightly. "I left her, Jason. I'm at a motel right now." A brief silence followed, one of those pauses where you can tell the other person is carefully choosing what to say next. "What happened?" His voice had softened, like he already knew this wasn't just a minor argument. She's been cheating on me, I said, my words bitter and sharp. I caught her last night at a motel with some guy. Jason let out a long, slow sigh, the kind that comes when you're trying to process something too awful to comprehend. Damn. I'm sorry, man. I didn't see that coming. Neither did I admitted. I mean, I had my suspicions, but I didn't think it was like this. Turns out, it's been going on for months. When I confronted her, she just kept lying. But it doesn't matter anymore. It's over. I'm done. Another pause. Then, he asked, where are you now? Some crappy motel on the edge of town. I just couldn't stay in that house. You want me to come by? We can grab breakfast or something. Talk it out. The idea of seeing someone who wasn't tangled up in this mess, someone who could just listen, felt like a lifeline. Yeah, I said, exhaling some of the tension I'd been holding in. That would help. We settled on a diner not far from where I was staying. As I got ready, I realized just how much I needed this. Carrying all of this alone was too much. The drive was short, but it felt like I was covering an impossible distance, like I was leaving behind everything I had built and stepping into something unknown. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was a start. When I arrived, Jason was already there, sitting in a booth in the corner with 2 cups of coffee waiting on the table. He waved when he saw me, his face a mix of sympathy and concern. As I slid into the seat, he nudged one of the coffees toward me, knowing I needed it. So, he said, leaning forward, wrapping his hands around his own cup. Tell me everything. And I did. I told him about the distance that had crept in between us, the suspicions I had tried to ignore, the endless lies Lauren had spun. I told him how I tracked her to the motel, how I confronted her, how she still tried to twist the truth even when she was caught red-handed. Piece by piece, I laid it all out, like unloading a burden that had grown too heavy to bear alone. Jason listened intently, nodding every now and then, his face grim. When I finally finished, he let out a slow breath. Man, I'm sorry. There's no excuse for what she did. But I'm glad you left. You can't come back from something like that. I nodded, taking a sip of my coffee. Yeah, I thought maybe we could fix things, but after last night, there's nothing left to fix. So what's your plan now? He asked, genuinely curious. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I'd been running on instinct, just trying to get away. I don't know yet, I admitted. At some point, I'll have to go back to the house. Figure out the next steps. Divorce, probably. Move out. The words felt foreign, like they weren't really mine yet. Jason gave me a sympathetic look. If you need a place to crash, my couch is always open. You don't need to be alone in that house right now. The offer was tempting, and I knew he meant it. But something inside me told me I needed to face it, to go back and see the life I had left behind. Maybe then I could make sense of it. Thanks, I said, managing a small smile. I might take you up on that. But I think I need to go back. Just not yet. We sat there for another hour, talking not just about Lauren, but about everything. Work, life, all the little things that felt normal in a world that suddenly wasn't. It was comforting in a way, a reminder that even when everything falls apart, some things stay the same. Jason had a way of making things feel simpler, of reminding me that this wasn't the end. Just a really painful chapter. As we finished breakfast and stepped outside into the crisp morning air, I realized something. I wasn't as alone as I had thought. I had friends. I had a life beyond this mess. And for the first time since last night, I felt a flicker of hope. Not the kind that wished for things to go back to the way they were, but the kind that believed I could rebuild. That somehow, I could find myself again in all this wreckage. You'll get through this, Jason said, clapping me on the shoulder as we parted ways. You're stronger than you think. I nodded, watching as he drove away, the morning sun climbing higher in the sky. And as I got back in my car, I realized he was right. I didn't feel strong. I didn't feel like I had control over anything. But maybe, just maybe, that would change. I had taken the first step, and sometimes that was all that mattered. Sitting in my car outside the diner, I watched as the sunlight gradually illuminated the world around me. It felt like the first time in months that I had truly seen daylight, though only hours had passed since I had left that house. The sensation was unfamiliar, standing at the edge of something new without a clear direction forward. But at least I was moving. And for now, that was enough. I understood I couldn't remain in this state of limbo forever. There were still unresolved matters, the house and Lauren. Yet, instead of feeling burdened by the weight of all the decisions ahead, I felt a rare sense of calm. I didn't have all the answers, but for once, I wasn't dwelling on the past. I wasn't consumed by thoughts of what I could have done differently or regretting how things had unraveled. The past was unchangeable. It was time to return to the house, not because I wanted to see her, but because I needed to reclaim control of my own life. I had to face the reality of the situation, to clean up the mess left behind. I was no longer the man who had walked out the night before, filled with rage and betrayal, holding on to a desperate hope that things might somehow be salvaged. That version of me was gone. Now, I was ready to move forward. The drive back felt unusually quick, as if my mind had switched into a mode of pure focus. As I approached the house, our house, though it no longer felt like ours, I saw it differently. It had become merely a place where two people had once lived, though only one had fought to keep it together. Pulling into the driveway, my eyes landed on Lauren's car still parked out front. A small part of me had hoped she would have left by now, but deep down, I knew better. She wasn't the kind of person to disappear. She would stay, clinging to the idea that this could still be fixed. But she didn't understand. There was nothing left to repair. Stepping out of my car, I braced myself for what was to come. Each step toward the front door felt heavier than the last. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open and walked inside. The air was thick with tension, still lingering from the night before. Lauren sat at the kitchen table, her gaze fixed on her phone, but the moment I entered, she looked up. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale. "You came back," she said softly, her voice carrying a fragile hope. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I stood there, staring at her, trying to reconcile the woman sitting before me with the one I had loved for so many years. But I couldn't. Too much had changed. "I didn't come back for us," I finally said, my tone steady but distant. "I came back to get things in order." Her hands trembled slightly as she lowered her gaze. "I know you're angry. I know I messed up. But we can still. No," I interrupted before she could weave any more illusions. "We can't. We're done, Lauren. Last night wasn't just a mistake. It was the truth finally coming to light. You've been deceiving me for months, and whatever we had, it's gone. I can't overlook that." She blinked, the weight of my words sinking in. Her mouth opened as if to argue, but no words came. It was as if she had finally realized that there was nothing left to say. I saw the pain in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. This was the result of her own choices. "So what happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I pulled out a chair and sat across from her, feeling strangely composed. "We end this," I stated firmly. "I'll get a lawyer. We'll divide the house, the finances, everything. I'll move out as soon as I find a place. There's no need to prolong this." She nodded slowly, her expression blank. "I guess I knew this was coming," she murmured. "I just didn't think it would happen this way." "Neither did I admitted. But deep down, I had sensed something was wrong for a long time. I had just refused to face it. For the next hour, we discussed logistics. It was methodical, almost transactional: who would keep the house, how we'd handle the finances, and what steps were necessary to finalize everything. Lauren tried to maintain civility, but I could see the cracks forming in her composure. Every so often, she would glance at me, guilt evident in her eyes, as if searching for the right words to undo the damage. But she never found them. There was nothing left to fix. When the discussion was over, I stood up, ready to leave. I had gathered the essentials the night before, and I saw no reason to linger any longer than necessary. As I picked up my bag, Lauren rose to her feet as well, her eyes glistening with fresh tears. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "for everything. I never wanted to hurt you." I looked at her, feeling detached. The words no longer meant anything. They didn't erase what had happened. "I know," I said quietly, my tone final. "But it's too late for that." And with that, I stepped through the door, leaving behind the life we had built. I didn't have a clear destination yet. Maybe I'd crash at Jason's for a few nights, or find a hotel until something more permanent came along. But as I drove away, I realized something important. I wasn't looking back. For the first time, my mind wasn't trapped in endless thoughts of what I could have done differently or how I might have salvaged our marriage. Instead, my focus shifted to what lay ahead, to the process of rebuilding. The uncertainty of the future no longer filled me with fear. For the first time in ages, it felt liberating. And that feeling was enough. The house, the memories, the deceptions, they were all behind me now. The only thing left to do was to keep driving, to continue moving forward. And that's exactly what I did. I began deleting the photos. One after another, they disappeared. Each image felt false, a distorted version of what I once believed we had, but never truly did. As I scrolled through them, the realization hit me. So much of my life had been invested in someone who was never the person I thought she was. Eventually, I set the phone down for good, staring at the ceiling as silence settled around me. There was no turning back. I understood that now. No amount of words or reassurances could erase what had happened. Lauren had made her decision, and now I had made mine. This was the first night of a new chapter in my life. A chapter one would face alone. But maybe that wasn't something to fear. Maybe, after everything, this was my chance to rediscover who I was without her. To reclaim the parts of myself that had faded in the years spent clinging to something that had long since disappeared. As I drifted into an uneasy sleep, one thought echoed in my mind. It was over. And for the first time, the idea of that didn't scare me.